Hello everyone, we welcome you all to this Week Tech Tuesday webinar on best practices for implementing cloud data governance and catalog. Today's speakers are Kristen, who's a senior consultant, and Stephen, who's a solution architect from IPS team. Before we start the session, let's go through some of the housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour that includes 15 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in Q&A box, which will be answered at the end of the presentation. All participants will be muted during the presentation. The session will be recorded and it will be available on our InfoSupport YouTube channel and Success Portal, where you can download the slide deck. Please feel free to submit your suggestion or feedback for this session in the post-webinar survey. The Success Portal is a micro-learning platform that offers free, unlimited learning to all the registered users. This feature-rich platform helps you learn and adopt to Informatica products better. The following are important links that you can go over later. This will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, Kristen and Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Stephen will first start off by going over some technical considerations when you're first starting to implement CDGC. And then I'll be going over some role considerations and responsibilities that you may need to add in and some questions that you'll need to ask yourself surrounding this area. From there, I'll then talk about how to design the foundation of your assets within CDGC as you begin to roll out your implementation. And then finally, the last topic, Stephen will go over the data quality capabilities within CDGC, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. All right, Stephen.
Thanks, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Let's discuss technical considerations. To this point, let's assume that you're an Informatica Cloud customer and you have an account, you're able to log in, and the administrator, metadata command center, data governance and catalog, data profiling, and data quality services are available for you. We'll discuss these throughout the presentation. As your first technical step, you'll likely want to install the Secure Agent. The Secure Agent is a lightweight program installed on a Linux or Windows server that runs all the tasks configured in Informatica Cloud Services. It processes your company's data within your environment or at an Informatica-hosted cloud environment. Based upon your requirements, there may be a need to tune, group, scale, or separate Secure Agents. And we'll look at tuning in a bit, but wanted to address Secure Agent groups. And Secure Agent groups provide capabilities such as high availability. So if an agent isn't available, the job will run on another available Secure Agent from the agent group. Load balancing, the execution of various tasks will be distributed to the various agents in the group in a round-robin fashion. Or another case would be for job isolation. You may want to specifically assign jobs based on department or project, maybe by location for on-prem versus cloud-based systems, or by service, maybe data integration just as one group and metadata ingestion as another. Now, when it comes to sizing specifically for cloud data governance, Informatica provides very specific sizing guidelines that differ from other services. While the documentation may say that the Secure Agent machine may only need 4 CPU cores and 16 gig of RAM, Data Governance and Catalog requires 16 CPU and 64 gig of RAM. And I've seen it work on as small as 8 CPU and 32 gig of RAM, but the performance was slow and definitely not recommended. Now, you have the proper hardware, you're starting the service using the account created to run it with permissions, and it doesn't start. Most commonly, we ensure that there's no virus scan or content filter or other software that could be running. That's the most common issue that I've encountered related to this. You'll see in this architecture diagram that the Secure Agents are installed perhaps on-premise, perhaps in a cloud environment. You want to consider using a Secure Agent in the same ecosystem as a catalog source. It reduces network latency and optimizes performance. For example, use an AWS-based secure agent to extract metadata from an Amazon S3 catalog source. And for higher asset loads, you may want to consider adding additional secure agents to significantly reduce the execution time and improve profiling performance. As data is ingested, I wanted to point out that the Informatica Cloud contains metadata and profiling results only. The actual data processing takes place on wherever your secure agent resides. Now, if there are concerns about who can view profiling results, you always have the option to profile data, but not display results by restricting what the users can see. All outbound communication with the Informatica Cloud will take place over port 443, and we'll discuss inbound communication on the next slide. Now, we run the job and it fails. We try again and again with no success, and we also see that the jobs don't even initialize. There's no start or end time there. We finally open a log and we see a message that the task can't be deployed. And this common error is indicative that your company uses a protective firewall, and you'll need to include Informatica Cloud IP addresses to the list of approved IP addresses. So by doing this, you can ensure that the secure agent can connect to the Informatica Cloud servers to perform all of the necessary tasks, and also allows for the user's web browsers to be able to access and work on the Informatica Cloud application. And Informatica has documented each of these IP addresses in the following links and will resolve this issue. Now that we're able to connect and have everything up and running, let's work on a bit of configuration to tuning to take advantage of the CPU and memory available on a given secure agent. And there are several primary settings to configure. Let's look at the first one, which is the number of concurrent jobs. So by default, a secure agent is configured to execute 2 mapping tasks. Regardless of the number of CPUs on the Linux or Windows server, no more than 2 tasks can run concurrently. An additional task will wait in the queue until one of the 2 slots becomes available. So to fully leverage the CPU capacity of the secure agent server to achieve a higher degree of concurrency, you'll configure the secure agent data integration server, max DTM processes, custom property to the number of parallel tasks. So the DTM performs session validation. It creates threads to initialize the session that do the reading, writing, and transformation of the data, and it handles pre and post session operations too. It's advised not to set this value higher than the total number of CPUs available on the machine. So in this example, assuming that we have a 16 CPU server, we would multiply the number of CPU by 0.75 if we have standard on-prem sources, and by 0.33 if we have cloud warehouse or data lake connections. And this is the custom configuration details of the data integration server as shown here. So set to 12. We then have several memory settings that will ensure that you have sufficient memory, first to optimize performance so you aren't paging to disk, and also so the job can even get started. Too little memory and you'll get an error, some sort of Java heap space, something like that. So these examples assume that you have at least 64 gig of memory as recommended, because certainly you don't want to allocate more memory than is available. The first setting is the max heap size for the MFA, or Metadata Foundation agent. So that Metadata Foundation agent is responsible for extraction and processing of the metadata, and it can get quite large at times. Specifically, my peers and I have had experience where this needed to be increased for some Snowflake sources. Next, we have infra-memory, which is a total memory, maximum memory, and free memory specific to the agent. And the secure agent distributes this Java heap memory among the services of Informatica Cloud. As the name says, it's virtual, so the user can't see this memory from the secure agent machine, but out of the box, it's set to 512 meg, but the documentation states that this needs to be set to at least 2 gig or 2048 meg. So it might be required to increase the value of infra-memory if the out-of-memory or Java heap error messages are observed. Finally, there's the JVM custom property, and that's at the session level, and it creates memory on the mapping task level. And you'll may see errors like Java heap space, or memory shortage. And that's displayed in a session log or activity log when running a task. In other words, during profiling or data quality tasks, CDI tasks. So that's where you would increase the memory for that. So now you have the secure agent up and running. You can communicate to the Informatica Cloud, and you've tuned things. So next, just don't forget to import the out-of-the-box contents. Metadata Command Center provides predefined data classifications, lookup tables, and a relationship inference model. And you can import these predefined assets, and you'd use them in several of the enrichment processes like relationship discovery, data classification, and so on. And you'll also want to import the data quality content. So from the administrator service, you'll see a section on add-on bundles. And a bundle is a set of related mappings, mapping tasks, maplets, and other assets that users can leverage in data integration or data quality or other projects. And in this case, we can leverage the data quality rules to take advantage of the pre-built logic, saving your time in development. So you can see there's a number of different rules broken down by type of rule. Finally, regarding connections, the assumption is that each source has a connection to be created in the administrator, but that's not always the case. If you're unsure, you can open any source in Metadata Command Center and look for the connection dropdown. If it's there, then you need to create a connection for this in administrator. Otherwise, you'll simply create the connection here in Metadata Command Center. As another option, this slide shows which sources require a connection in administrator and which don't. Next, I'll hand things over to Kristen, where she'll discuss the topics of foundation design and roles and responsibilities.
Thank you, Stephen, for going through some of those technical considerations. I'm going to take things back a little bit and start talking about your program as a whole before diving into your roles and responsibilities and the assets that you'll want to guide your program to. Because before you even think about who is going to be interacting with CDGC or what kinds of assets you want to be presented within there, you need to ask and consider as a program why you're using CDGC. And what was that deciding factor for both you and your program, as well as your company, to either start a data governance program or expand on it and bring it to the next level? Because the answer to this will then lead to how you as a program want your users to interact with CDGC and in what ways they may want to operationalize it. And them in operationalizing it will then need to align back with that deciding factor. Or else there'll become some mismatch and some miscommunication about expectations, which will then make the implementation extremely difficult. So then with you as a team, you'll need to think about what sort of strengths and weaknesses you have. Do your people have those conceptual or technical skills to meet those newly aligned expectations? And then what operations need to be completed to fulfill your goal? And do your strengths and weaknesses match these operations as well? And then finally, does your company already have that data first culture? Because as you're onboarding new data owners and data stewards, it will be a lot easier if there already is a data first culture, because a lot of these tasks will already be in their day-to-day lives. Whereas if it isn't, there'll need to be some retraining and changing of a lot of habits that exist across your company. So now we'll dive a bit more into your stewards and owners. Now, what do they care about? Are they passionate about data? Do they understand the importance of data governance, or has it never been communicated to them? Because they need to know what they're doing, and it needs to align with what they're passionate about, or else you'll never gain the adoption that you need. And then you'll need to think about what their capacity for work is. So you can add in some of that load balancing effort and change up what tasks might be split amongst different roles. And then what do they need from you specifically to be successful? What information do they need beforehand? What sort of training do they need? And what ways can you minimize the level of effort do they need to do beforehand? Within your typical data governance program, your data stewards and owners will be the ones who have that highest degree of influence over the data and the information surrounding it. However, these roles are broad, and those specific functions within them need to be narrowed down and split across different people. What you'll need to do is you'll need to think about what each person is passionate about when it comes to data, and not just what their abilities are and the size of that ask. So are they more focused on quality? Do they even care about privacy? And do they enjoy teaching others? Because that will end up being a large part of this. Your data steward roles should be split by the function, and some of these functions may then be combined within one role, such as, since the data steward may want to add in quality scores on their literacy assets that they manage. And once you've defined those responsibilities will tie directly back to the permissions you're assigning to each role in the administrator module in Informatica Cloud. So here I have an example of how a purely literary role might look for a data steward within the catalog portion of CDGC. So with this, the person would be responsible for the creation and edit activities of metadata. And so they are granted the more in-depth view and control within CDGC and Metadata Command Center. But those functions are then limited to exclude some of those governance assets, since you want to split between what's necessary for their work and what they may just want to read and view as sort of supplementary information. And this is why you'll want to think about what they'll be doing, so you can enable and disable these permissions and have it tailored to your specific roles. Then on the flip side, you might have an opposing role that would be more like the governance data steward role to the catalog one, since they'll have sort of the same function of reading and writing different assets, but this one will be limited to those governance assets rather than those catalog pieces. And so this will give them less access to Metadata Command Center, since you'll want to guide these users only to the sections they want and care about. So it'll be less overwhelming. Since while you may be limiting tasks for people, having that visuals for them to be able to separate it out will seem less daunting and like less items for them to do. And then of course, as your program expands, you can adjust these permissions to match what new features may have been implemented or any new initiatives your program might be taking. And so now that you know what to think about when creating your different roles, you'll need to think about how these will start interacting within CDGC and with each other. So you'll want to group the stakeholders by the types of data that they are responsible for, as well as that role within CDGC that they play. Since this will then help assign that overarching responsibility for the assets, while also simplifying those workflows that are enabled within CDGC. And so what you'll do is on each asset, You'll want to assign that group, and then at least 2 specific people should then be assigned as stakeholders. This will lessen the load on the individuals maintaining the assets by broadening it out, while still allowing data consumers to see who they should reach out to for any questions, comments, or feedback. And honestly, when you don't add any stakeholders, the assets tend to become a free-for-all and they lose value. You'll start missing some standardization, you'll have duplication, generally messy assets, same way that you can get messy data. And another thing to consider when making these assignments is that they are used directly within the workflows that are configured within Metadata Command Center. As this workflow is more generalized by asset type, such as business term, or you can even do it for systems or data sets. And so when an asset is created or edited, that workflow will read those stakeholders assigned to those roles and then distribute those tasks accordingly. And as we saw in the previous example, Alexandra was assigned as that data owner, whereas I was assigned that data steward. So she would be getting that approver task list, whereas I'll be getting those editing tasks when that workflow is triggered. All right, now that we've talked about how to define your roles and thinking about who's going to be using your solution, you can now begin to think about what assets those users will need to create. And since with CDGC, its strengths lie in its relationships, and this helps connect its information and establish that search functionality for your different assets. And you'll want to go back and think about how these assets then align to those to your use case. And you'll want to then focus on your quality of assets, since this will then help operationalize your solution rather than keeping it as a dictionary, which would happen if you try to expand the number of assets rather than going more in depth and limiting what's within CDGC. So we're going to circle back to the questions, what do your stakeholders care about and what do they need to be successful? Since those gaps identified with these first 2 questions will lead to your assets and that starting structure that's going to be brought into CDGC. Because you'll then want to think about what should exist within those gaps that's currently missing and the data domains that either expand across them and touch multiple points or dive deep within them. And this will then bring you out to the broader issue that you want that program to solve. But you'll then need to define and narrow down those pieces to add in the quality of your assets. You'll want to focus on those parts that expand across gaps, since that'll help you expand your program once you've had this sort of laid out, and you'll start building out those relationships. I personally would focus on sort of 3 main core items that start and then build out your information from there. So I'm going to use a critical data element as an example of what a core asset could be. You can use anything that's sort of main to your business and that you want to focus on. But you'll need to ask who owns this and what their main definition is, since that will get you to your first business term. And then from there, you'll want to ask others who use the data how they use it and what their definition is for it. And this will then give you those children business terms that are based on these variations, since everyone is going to have some different expectations if you don't have that communication already established. And now you'll need to think about what uses that data. Is it a metric or process? Do multiple people or technologies rely on it? And then which stakeholders built it and who uses it? You would then add these assets in and then connect them to those different variations used by the stakeholders. For example, one stakeholder may use a metric incorrectly because they have a different definition of the data within it than the stakeholder who created that metric. And this will help you find those areas and improve maybe some of those processes or reports that may be having unexpected outcomes. And from here, you'll be asking your next questions based on the answers to your last question. And it'll just keep snowballing and will keep getting more and more related to those relationships that exist across your data assets. And this is all done to consolidate the information and align your data consumers to it which will eventually lead to the standardization of your data and their definitions. And then some other questions that you may want to ask while doing this initial workshop is, what data domains are needed to build this use case so you can identify what data to focus on and scan within the catalog? And then any company or department specific terminology that is used in relationship with these items. Once you've laid out these different assets and identified these pieces, you'll have your starting collection of assets to then expand upon and for your data consumers to begin using right away. And having these already set will streamline your implementation and also have you set up for a nice, clean, and usable foundation. And so now I'll switch back over to Stephen so he can discuss data quality and how that will then impact what you're doing within CDGC.
Thank you, Kristen. To this point, you have things up and running. Your business terms are defined and loaded. Now, in our standard enrichment, you'll have the technical assets profiled, they'll be classified and related. Additionally, if it's enabled, you'll also leverage the AI/ML capabilities called CLAIRE, and that'll bring the technical and business terms together. And we'll see an example of that here, where the glossary terms are present and related to technical assets such as country or city. So what's next? Well, let's expand this solution by identifying and applying data quality rules to check the validity, the consistency, and other data quality dimensions, providing more insight into the data for the end users. To create and apply data quality rules, we'll leverage the data quality and data profiling services in addition to Metadata Command Center and Data Governance and Catalog. However, as we'll discuss, there's no one best way to create the data quality rules. Some, such as data quality service, are more developer friendly. And by developer, I mean through a low code or no code solution. Other rules may require accessing pre-built logic, or even a simple description that can be converted into a rule. But regardless of the approach, we must ensure that data quality is enabled for that source in Metadata Command Center. Let's look at that now. The next step after creating your metadata extract for a given source is to enable and configure the data quality settings. So focusing just on data quality, you'll need to enable that for any data quality rule to be executed. Once it's enabled, you then have several options. And for what we're demonstrating, which is data quality automation, of course, make sure that automation is enabled so that that rule can be applied to all the technical assets that fall under a given business term. And then you'll also select which assets to apply the rule to and how many records to run the data quality rules against. But please note that the sampling options listed here do vary by source. Now that that's configured, let's ensure we have technical asset associated to a business term. In this case, in this example, we have several state fields that were associated either through CLAIRE or manually to the business term of state. Let's run a profile against some of the data to learn more about the contents. Within the profiling service, you'll simply select a connection that you've created, as well as the table that contains the asset to be profiled, and then you run the profile. Once the profile runs, beyond the profiling statistics generated, you can get further insight by selecting the Insights tab. This will identify potential issues for each field that was profiled. And then by filtering this down to the column of interest, you'll see that several types of checks were run. So drilling into the one related to field lengths, you can see that it's creating several checks for the max and min lengths of that field. These rules can be modified to add, remove, or update the existing logic. They may be complete, but you can also use these generated rules as a starting point. Another option, since you've profiled the data and learned about it, is to create your own rule specification from scratch through the data quality service. So a rule specification is an asset that represents the data requirements of a business rule in a logical form. So what it does, it defines the type of data it contains, the conditions it must satisfy, and the actions to take when the data meets or doesn't meet those conditions. This can be as simple as a check for field length, but you have a whole library of pre-built functions, rules, dictionaries, more to validate business rules against your data. Within here, you can also test your logic against the test data. Ultimately, once saved, this rule is now available to select within Data Governance and Catalog. Now that you have a rule in place through creating one or leveraging existing ones, you now will associate your business term to the rule to run against the underlying technical data. This step is all done from the data quality rule template. But just remember that if you want this rule to be applied to all the technical assets under this business term, select the automation checkbox. Now, what if you don't have a rule in place yet? This is where the natural language processing capabilities come in. What you could do is type in the rule, such as in this example, the length of the field can't be less than 4, and it's converted into a rule specification once it's saved. There are NLP, or again, natural language processing rules available in the documentation that you can follow to create the necessary text for your rule. And then finally, as a last step, the rules are auto-generated and run against the technical assets. When you save the template, you'll be notified that DQ rules will be auto-generated and run, and that they'll run against the technical assets under that business term. The data quality rules will be run, results generated, and then within the data quality tab of the given business term, you'll see results displayed by rule, by quality dimensions such as completeness or validity, and other information for each run. For more detail on the settings in Metadata Command Center and the data quality rule template, please refer to this configuration chart, also available in the Informatica online documentation.
Hi all, we have reached the Q&A part. Please post your questions.
You cannot associate a workflow to a group. It's assigned specifically to the roles. So how it works is that when the workflow begins to run, it'll read who on the asset is assigned as that role. If a group is assigned that role, it will generate those tasks for the people within that group as well. So to answer your question on can the workflows be associated to a group, yes, but it is through the stakeholdership rather than on the workflow in Metadata Command Center. So to answer the question on how to tie the DQ rule to a glossary item, what you'll do is either on the business term itself or through glossary association within Metadata Command Center, you can add those relationships to those data elements. And so then when you create that rule template and attach that glossary item such as the business term or metric to that rule, it will see all the relationships to those data elements and then create those rule occurrences per each data element. So for scanning the data quality rules, the benefit of this is that anyone can see what those scorecards is, what those scorecard percentages are for those data elements. So when someone's going through and maybe shopping around for maybe the best element to use for either a report or whatever they're looking to create, they can see whether or not the quality of that data is good before using it. And then that'll also help other areas sort of identify, hey, maybe we need to start a cleaning initiative in this area because the scores are starting to go down. That's another method to sort of keep track of what's going on within your data elements and the quality of them.
There's a question if a DQ rule is set for automation, but comes across a data source that is missing columns or fields that were called out in the rule. Does the rule fail? I don't see how there would be missing columns or fields because there is already an association to that field. Would the rule fail? It would fail on that record, but the entire run would not fail. No, it just. But again, you're creating that association to that column or field from data that you've ingested from a source. I would suggest also, rerunning that source if columns or anything is, are removed. I mean, you would also want to run your scans on a frequent basis or scheduled basis so that you can catch those sort of issues.
To go on and answer the next question, domains and subdomains do exist within CDGC. And these are more on the level of what is a data domain, so that category or concept of the data itself. If you're coming from the on-prem world, and I see within the Q&A there are a few of you on here, within EDC, it's different from what data domains are called within EDC, but it's similar to what is within Axon. And what was previously data domains within EDC is now called data classification within CDGC, to add some context around that category. And to answer the question following that of how to integrate the glossaries from Axon to EDC, that is the next webinar next Tuesday that will go through that migration and best practice.
To set up our enabled DQ in Metadata Command Center, again, to support it, I see there's a question there about where to enable auto rules for DQ. So again, if you go back through the presentation, you'll see that you're going to enable it both in the Metadata Command Center for whatever source that you want to run data quality against, and then you'll also again configure that in the data quality rule template. In that template, there's a switch to enable automation. You would between those two, that's how your automation will occur. There's also a question here about, can you explain the SaaS portion a bit more? Do we need to install agents on every cloud app database, et cetera? No. The recommendation, though, is that if you have your on-prem sources, you want to put your secure agent closer to where they reside. Same with your SaaS sources, meaning if something's on AWS, you would want to install a secure agent there, but not one for every database, for everything. And again, it's not installing it, let's say in the cloud, and having your agent on-prem. It will still run. It just won't run as quickly. But just know that, you certainly would not want to install one where every database is, not one for each.
To answer the question on when you do need to rerun your systems to scan metadata or to profile, the information that was stored in previous runs is currently saved as sort of temporary data within on the security server. That's where most of the metadata and models are stored for that. And so when you rerun, anything new is added on top of those files on the secure agent. For notifying stakeholders with DQ scores of a particular rule occurrence, you can comment and tag stakeholders on the assets themselves to either notify them of maybe something's going on. And that's sort of one of the quickest ways, because that will send an email to that stakeholder as well as send a task notification to them as well within CDGC. So most business users will be creating those DQ rules within CDGC itself, because that's typically where a lot of I shouldn't say easier mechanics, but when someone's first learning how to create the DQ rules, that's usually one of the starting places to go, as you can do it's a bit of a simpler format. When they start wanting to go and get more complex and have multiple rules within one rule, for example, so if you wanted to do a pattern match as well as a null, that's when you would want to send them to the data quality module itself to then add in those extra layers to it.
Question is, are there various types of secure agents for DQ versus EDC? So EDC is on-premise, which is different as is DQ. So a secure agent runs all of the cloud-based processes, and that one secure agent can run any of the services that are part of the Informatica data management platform.
For enabling DQ within your system, in order to be able to see the module, you'll have to go onto the roles or assign the correct roles to have the permission to be able to view the data quality modules, as well as run and touch some of those different assets for data quality. For Metadata Command Center, in order for it to be able to support it, what you would do is in the runtime environment, when you would enable different connectors and services, you would add data quality in there. For most times, if it's the first runtime environment that you've created within the org, it should already be set up and enabled for Metadata Command Center to run it.
Are there going to be any upcoming sessions around APIs and CDGC? The answer is right now, they're not available. I would say that product management would be the one who would hold those sessions when that does become available.
Or how does Informatica support change management as organizations shift towards cloud-based data governance and cataloging? We do have some articles posted within Velocity on the Success portal, or through an IXS engagement, we can walk you through how to go through that different adoption process to be more cloud first, data first, and trying to get more of that cultural shift along with the change management itself. Are there any additional questions? So for the step-by-step runbook for cloud implementation and checklist, we do in the Success portal have a checklist for data governance implementations, and cloud does have a checklist within there for cloud data governance. We don't necessarily have a step-by-step runbook available right now for actually implementing CDGC, as it does vary a bit by the type of company that needs to enable it. But those are pieces that are still work in progress, as this is also emerging technology.
Do the data quality rules from CDGC, can they also be embedded into CDI workflows? Yes, so these are rules that you're creating, just like you're saying, from CDGC using natural language processing, and those rules generated in your data quality service and then can be then brought into your CDI mappings, without a doubt.
So for measuring the success or efficiency of your data governance strategy when using these services, what we recommend doing is taking sort of, not timestamps, but when you're sort of looking at sort of what's going on in processes today, sort of time, how long does it take before something can be built? How long does it take before new processes can be onboarded? Whether or not like you're having feedback either in marketing, so if you're having bounce back emails when it comes to data quality, like taking those initial sort of points, and then after implementing, usually waiting a few months so those can become an habitual process so you can get a better measurement, taking those again and seeing what that difference is. Since data governance does have an indirect impact on a lot of different areas, you won't necessarily see an immediate jump in numbers, but you'll be able to see the changes in these processes and how those are getting better, and that's how you would measure the success of data governance.
So the secure agent's active and running, but the services can't be started. What's the reason? I see a few different issues that it could be. It could be the sizing of the server. It could be other processes running on that server that are preventing those services from starting up. Firewalls, sorts of any sort of, I guess, application that's running that could possibly block that. Those to me would be the first items that I would look at there. I would also probably look at some secure agent logs as well. I might look at the agentcore.log or the infaagent.log. Two things I'm thinking off the top of my head that may be part of that as well.
And also when a secure agent is upgraded, the previous services on there will still be listed, but as disabled while the new ones are starting up. So there will be some at times that will appear as disabled, but those are prior versions that are being onboarded off the secure agent.
And just as an aside, you may also want to open a support case as well. Mobile customer support is, very helpful. It should be able to, help you to resolve that issue. So take advantage of that.
So for when you would create DQ rules in CDGC versus the DQ service, I usually recommend for within CDGC itself, more quick ones. So is something null or more completeness rules rather than specific accuracy or pattern. Because within DQ, you can piece those parts out. So pretty much if it's one rule, do it within CDGC. If it's multiple rules putting it together, so if you're doing one zip code where you want it to be 5 numbers, but also within a certain range, that what you would probably do within the DQ service instead. In the relationship between individual people and user roles be managed outside of Informatica, yes, technically you can. If you're doing SSO, you can map roles to the roles within Informatica. So you can manage the people in the roles that are assigned within with wherever you're managing that directory itself. Usually we recommend doing it with groups instead and mapping those groups to the roles within Informatica, since you can mix and match a bit more, whereas the roles-to-role relationship is one-to-one on who's assigned to what.
The CDGC encompass all of the features of EDC and Axon. I would answer that by saying CDGC was rolled out last year, and with quarterly updates, and it's interesting. In some ways, I would say that it has more advanced features. In some ways, it's yet to caught up to EDC and Axon. So, but you're seeing quarterly rollouts. The next one coming in July. That certainly add a lot of capability and is going to take it to and beyond what EDC and Axon currently offer.
Another thing to consider too with CDGC versus EDC and Axon is it does have some different terminology. So while you may be looking for a specific feature, it might have a different name. So as I mentioned earlier, data domains within EDC are data classifications within CDGC. The template for the DQ rule is in CDGC. So if you click New and then Business Rules, that's where you'll find the rule template. What you do in MCC is that will run the additional actual scanning and profiling of the data as that rule runs, but the rule creation happens in CDGC. For transitioning facets that don't yet exist within CDGC, such as your project or product facet, what you'll want to do is sort of look at how it's being managed within your system and sort of what would be the best relationship to what's currently in there. So would it fit better as a data domain versus a business term versus a policy or process? So sometimes, depending on how you're incorporating product, it might end up becoming a process instead. It's just one of those things that you'll have to balance out and see just where it fits best. Without looking at your system, I can't specifically say.
So to start an implementation of CDGC, all you have to do is install the secure agent, install the client's firewall, and connect to the Informatica host. I mean, there's certainly a lot more to it, but in order to get started, you need to have an account and have your secure agent set up. Yes, that would be correct. But then there's more right in that you need to complete all the prerequisites for whatever sources you're connecting to, creating your business assets and so on. But that would be your starting point. That's right.
To do exports of data within CDGC, you would do that from your search. So you would either search for, let's say, all data elements, and then you would go and there be a gear icon, and you would click on that and then click export. And that will allow you to export all of the data that was pulled in that search. So you can also do export of specific data elements connected to business terms or business terms connected to metrics, and you can mix and match what you need to export through that method. And that comes out as an Excel file. And you can load those changes back with your data elements. Loading them back, you would have to do for a business term, you'd have to do back through a bulk upload template. But your technical data elements, you can do from that export.
Right. We are not seeing any questions coming through. We will end the session. Thank you, Stephen and Kristen, for presenting today's webinar, and Jeffrey for joining as a panelist. We kindly request audience to take a survey and give us feedback once this webcast ends. Today's webinar will be available tomorrow on Success Portal under the Resources tab. Thank you all for attending.